Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Curious Realm's continuing coverage of the 2024 MUFON Symposium here in Irving, Texas. We have the great pleasure of being joined by not only guests, but friend of the podcast, Kathleen Marden. Welcome back.
Thank you. Great to see you again and in person this
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for the time, especially for the great interview about your aunt and uncle all of a few weeks ago.
My pleasure.
It's been interesting to see things in the community as far as that announcement went over the last couple weeks. So, how has the symposium been for you this year so far?
It's been wonderful. It's like old home day where lots of hugs. I love to hug.
Yeah.
And, lots of good conversations because it's last night it was with Bob Salas at the banquet, and that was very good. He's an old friend, a good friend, and really enjoyed seeing him. I had breakfast with him and his wife yesterday morning. So, that was great. Today I've been to the first two lectures, and the first one was on Antarctica, and what he absolutely knows, and then the speculation.
Yep.
And then the second one is of particular interest to me because it was on Havana Syndrome.
Yes.
And also on a little bit on Gary Nolan's study on the brains of military people who have been too close to UFOs and suffered what first appeared to be brain damage, but was not in the end brain damage. It was actually beneficial.
Interesting.
Yes, it gave these people greater spatial awareness, higher intelligence, and a higher level of psychic ability.
Remarkable. And that is quite literally a lot of where your research has taken you here in the last few years. And that's what I wanted to have you on to talk about, actually, because you were one of the founding members of the Experiencer Resource Team with MUFON, the idea of how we approach the experiencer, and those who have been in close quarters contact, those who have had abduction scenarios, things like that. Mm-hmm. It's pretty interesting. One of the things I have held for a while is and we talked about it last time you were on, the idea that much like any analog watch that gets around a large RF field or a magnetic field, things are changed, and that watch doesn't work the same as it did previously. So it always carries that magnetic signature with it.
Yes.
And I'm kind of the same mind, especially with UFO, UAP, that you're talking anything that could bend space and time, travel that kind of, you're talking about extreme RF fields, extreme magnetic fields, and those, can absolutely change your brainwave patterns, brain structure, all kinds of things.
That is true, and MUFON has done studies on that in the past. I have worked on two studies where we were looking for commonalities among experiencers. And many experiencers I knew from anecdotal reports had said that they had a medical diagnosis of chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome. And so that was a question that we asked. Now, it was less than 1% in the general population on our first study, yet it was 34% among experiencers of ET contact.
Wow.
Very, very high percentage. On the second study, it was actually 43%. The prevalence in the general population has risen a little bit since COVID and post-COVID syndrome.
Sure.
But still 43% among the experiencer population of the 516 individuals who took part in MUFON's ERT study.
Wow. And once again, that has led you down the road of your recent work, where it's much more of a spiritual basis, much more the change that happens with somebody as these things happen. And once again, the idea that people come back changed, sometimes even physically.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And I was very interested in academic studies done by Christopher Rosing and Kenneth Ring. And what their studies indicated were that experiencers of ET contact were undergoing changes. They were becoming more spiritual. They're developing psychic abilities. And very much the same kind of experience that near-death experiencers have.
Yeah.
The only difference that they could find is that the ET contact experiences often had developed trauma, particularly when they were children. And so I found that very interesting, and I wanted to look further into the commonalities that experiencers share. I knew a lot from academic studies,
Sure.
from anecdotal reports from experiencers that I'd worked with over the years, but we wanted statistics.
Now, when you're talking commonalities, are you talking about commonalities post-experience or commonalities pre-experience? Is there a tie amongst the commonality of the type of people that are chosen for abduction, does it seem?
Well, I have to tell you, I wanted to answer that question, but so many experiencers today are intergenerational experiencers, and so, they're probably taken in the womb.
Yeah, sure.
or shortly thereafter. So how can you then get good quantitative data on that kind of thing? How long ago was it? Most of the people who participated in our study, it was something like 75%, stated that they had been taken for the first time when they were less than 20 years old.
Oh, wow.
36% when they were less than 5 years old.
Wow. And yeah, you kind of have to wonder, especially with as traumatic as these experiences are, so often, especially as children, people just bury that trauma completely and utterly. It becomes a buried part of their psyche that doesn't even emerge sometimes until you're 20, 30 years old,
Yes, that's true. And, when you have to remember that young children are very prone to fantasy as well. So there are so many variables that come in here that make some of our questions difficult to answer.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to studying the phenomenology of these and the connection between them, it can be very convoluted in that way.
It can be. Now, there were people who indicated that they had a family history of psychics and that they felt that they were born psychic. So we know that there is a percentage, I can't remember the statistic itself, of people who actually had some of these gifts all of their lives.
Okay. So yeah, people who had come from sensitive backgrounds, people who had clairvoyance in their family previously, things like that. And now, you were talking about the generational experiencer, the idea you yourself are a generational experiencer. You had people in your family who were experiencers as well as you. In
the previous generation and perhaps the one before that.
Yeah. Now, what kind of commonalities have you found amongst amongst generational experiencers like that?
Well, those were generally the experiencers who tested for having UFO abduction syndrome on a scale that Dr. Don C. Donderi, who worked on the study with us, was able to administer to the participants. And we were able to identify, using that American Personality Disorder Scale, those who were had UFO abduction syndrome, true abductees, those who were wannabes or simulators, as they were called, and those from the general population. And so
the control,
and we found
so to speak,
that those who had UFO abduction syndrome, and we don't use abduction very often anymore, but that was done back when that was the word.
Yeah.
And so what we've discovered is they, and we separated them, have all of these commonalities at a much higher rate than the general population of experiencers.
Wow. Wow. Interesting. And what percentage did you find amongst experiencers that were generational experiencers?
It was a little over 50%.
What?
Knew that they were. Yes.
Wow. That is remarkably large.
It is. Yes.
Wow. Well, yeah, that is. I'm sorry, my brain is still trying to write, because it's very rare in any scientific study that you get a ratio of 50%. Period. Much less the fact of something like this, where 50% of experiencers were generational experiencers, where numerous people in their family or other people in their family had similar experience.
Yeah, those with UFO abduction syndrome.
Wow.
So I have to separate them from
Yeah.
experiencers by
That's
calling
true.
them
I'm sorry.
abductees.
That's true. Yes.
Now, the abductee group also had 95% increase in spiritual awareness.
Interesting.
Unbelievable.
Wow.
They were psychic or intuitive at a much higher rate than general experiencers. There were all of these things.
Did y'all find a percentile of that? What was the percentile of people that amongst abduction syndrome that had increased psychic ability?
I think it was 85%. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not that great at memorizing
That's okay.
statistics.
That's okay.
I don't have them in front of me.
Even once again, though, to know that it is beyond the deviation of norm by any large percent is fantastic and amazing. And when you start considering especially the means by which a lot of abductees discuss their conversations with entities happen. Most of them are not verbally. They are via mental telepathy, things like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you think it's the fact that does it seem that those that are abducted have to be changed in order to be communicated with? Does that seem to be the case?
I think in terms of telepathic communication with these non-humans, probably.
Yeah.
But some of them are actually telepathic with one another as well. Not many, but lower percentage. And a question that we asked that I found very interesting was, did you wake up paralyzed and able only to move your eyes? And so it was a fairly high percentage who said they'd been able to have that experience. But then, you could explain that as sleep paralysis.
Sure. I'm a sleep paralysis sufferer myself. So.
And then we went on and we asked, have you been awake? And did you observe non-human entities coming into your room, and then were you paralyzed? And the percentage dropped way off for the experiencers in general.
Sure.
But for the UFO abduction syndrome group, that was still high.
Wow. Incredible. And now, before this study happened, I assume the fact, I can hear my audience now. Like we took all these people through standard psychological testing, things like that, before they went through the study to make sure that everybody's psychologically balanced, all that kind of stuff. We had, like you said, control of normal population inside of there, everything else.
Yeah, and in that study that Dr. Don Derry standardized, when he was working with the people who had actually developed the American Personality Inventory.
Okay.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah, no, and that's just that's what I wanted to make clear for the audience. It was like all these people went through standard psychological testing to begin with to make sure,
but not the people who participated in MUFON study.
Oh, okay.
The 516. They did not
Okay.
go through standard psychological testing.
Okay.
That would take a whole
It
lot
would.
of money.
It would.
We didn't have the funding
Okay.
to be able to do that. It would have been great. It would have been wonderful to be able to do all sorts of psychological and medical tests, but nobody's giving us the funding to do that.
Yeah.
So we do the best we can with the tools that we have.
Okay.
A very interesting question that we asked is, if you could end your experiences today, would you?
And what was the percentage of yes with that?
Very low.
Wow. Wow.
With the experiencers overall, 71% said they would not end their experiences today if they could. And it was even a higher percentage with those who had UFO abduction syndrome.
Interesting. And out of those with UFO abduction syndrome, how many were repeat abductees, where they'd had more than one abduction scenario?
We had about 20% who had an experience only one time.
Okay.
We had a very large percentage of individuals, most of them after that, had numerous experiences periodically throughout their lifetime.
Wow.
And we even had one participant who was in her 80s and still had contact.
Interesting. That is remarkable to know that somebody has been having experiences for that long of their life.
Yes. And, so many people think, oh, well, this is all about reproduction. It's not. It is far more scientific and much wider in scope than standard reproductive procedures.
Interesting. And by that you mean people weren't just abducted to take DNA. They weren't just abducted to take an ovum. That kind of stuff.
That's correct. There are all sorts of things that are going on, and one of their concerns is about our toxicity, the level of toxicity in our in our bodies.
Yeah.
And there are people who are being tested for this. It's showing concern by these non-humans for our human bodies.
Interesting.
And so, there is some compassion there. There is some concern. And they've been educating experiencers for a very, very long time about our environment and their concerns about our failure to be good stewards to our environment, and also about our use of nuclear weapons.
Yep.
That's another major concern to them. They take people around nuclear weapons bases.
Oh, wow. Wow. Yeah,
nuclear
and I mean
facilities.
we heard from Robert Salas last night about the Malmstrom incidents and Echo Flight and everything else. And with that in mind, how many experiences of those with abduction syndrome had a malevolent experience?
There were about 5 people out of 516.
Interesting.
Who said that they had a malevolent experience, that this was just plain evil. And as I interviewed them and learned more about them, this was something that was very, very dark. This was more what you might think of as demonic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, everybody initially is traumatized. They're fearful. They dread this. They think that something terrible is happening to them, and they have the right to feel that way. They're taken against their will.
Yep.
Their bodies are being probed. They're not treated very respectfully by certain groups.
Not by our standards, anyway.
No, not by our standards.
Not by human standards.
Yeah. But I don't know what I was going to say.
That's all right. That's all right. It's interesting to talk about this study specifically because because yes, there is a difference between experiencer and abductee.
There is.
And it's when it comes to abduction, when it comes to people like you said being taken against their will, It's not like you just saw something sitting in a field, you know.
That's right.
It is an invasive thing. It definitely it leads to a lot of trauma in people's lives.
The psychological impact is much greater. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and not that people aren't. There are numerous people that are reticent and afraid to tell people that they've seen anything, be it in the sky, on the ground, what have you. But it's different.
Long-term taboo.
Yeah, no, exactly. Especially if you live in a small town, if you're a law enforcement officer, anything like that, you know, there can be consequences in some sides of society for literally saying you have seen something. You know, much less if you have been assaulted or violated in this kind of way. It becomes a very personal violation. It becomes something that's very hard to share with family, friends, anybody.
It is. And when we set up the ERT at MUFON, we discovered that there were people who might have attempted to speak to their family about this. And the family simply didn't want to speak about it.
Yeah.
If they spoke to somebody, they would be ridiculed or they'd be told, don't tell anybody this. And so the ERT wanted to just provide the opportunity for the people to listen to someone would listen who was non-judgmental.
That's right. Yeah.
That was the whole thing.
Well, and you, even as a generational experiencer, your Aunt Betty told you, like, this ever happens to you, honey, don't tell anybody.
She did tell me that, yes.
You know, and it's interesting to see how much of society has opened not only to the experience, but to being able to share the experience in that kind of way. Have you seen an uptick in report? I know you're no longer intimately involved with the ERT.
Well,
I'm
the
way that you once were. You're
right.
a consultant.
I'm no longer the director.
Have there been an uptick in reportings over the last few years to the ERT since the founding and the real rooting in to the community?
Not as many now as we had initially.
Interesting.
And, around 2016 through 2018, 20, something like that. Yeah. We were receiving at least 100 reports per month, sometimes 150, that high during a certain period of time. But now it is slower, and the ERT has changed because MUFON decided that the primary focus is investigation. Yeah. So if you want to speak with an ERT member, you must first undergo a field investigation by an investigator, level 3, highly experienced, compassionate investigator.
Sure.
And then you can speak to a member of the ERT for another compassionate investigation.
Sure.
So it's, they're not receiving as many reports as they did prior to this.
Okay. Well, I think it's more the fact that they're receiving more filtered reports. You know, it's really more what is coming to them will be much more curated as to focused directly with the ERT.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, I think so. And people trusted the ERT because it was confidential.
Yeah.
100% confidential.
Yeah.
None of that information went on MUFON's case management system. And now it will. And people are concerned about things like violation of confidentiality.
Yep.
And we know this happened with my aunt.
Yep.
And it happened to me, too.
Well, and especially when you're talking ERT, when you're talking, there's a lot of medical stuff involved there. You know?
There is. And a lot of very personal, intimate information that you do not want down on paper.
Yeah. Well, and you know that you may want to give anonymously. You may not want to have your name tied to that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's
you can give an
understandable.
anonymous report.
Yeah.
But it's not entirely confidential the way it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's always great chatting with you at these events. It's always great having you on. Let everybody know where they can go find your book, Forbidden Knowledge.
Yes, Forbidden Knowledge Edition 2 now.
Yep.
And it's available on Amazon. And also you can purchase an autographed copy from my website.
Fantastic.
Kathleen-Marden.com.
Awesome. And where can people go to get a hold of the MUFON Experiencer Resource Team?
Go to MUFON.com and file a report. And it's separate now. It used to be only file a UFO sighting, but it's separated so you can file an ET contact report or abduction report.
Awesome. Awesome. Yes. Kathleen, thank you so much as always for your time. It's more than a pleasure.
So great to speak with you.
Absolutely. While you are online finding all of the great information from Kathleen Marden at kathleen-marden.com, make sure to stop on by curiousrealm.com. That is where you can like, follow, subscribe, share, comment. That is where you can find your official copy of the field observation and encounter log. Stop on by and check that out, folks. Stay tuned. When we come back from this break, we will have more of our continuing coverage of the 2024 MUFON Symposium right here in Irving, Texas, after this.
The key to good science is good research. At the heart of good research is a good data set. With the field observation and encounter log from Curious Research, you can easily keep track of your investigative information all in one place, making it easier to review cases and readily see comparisons and contrasts between them. Whether out in the woods squatching, in a back room gathering EVPs, or using high-tech gear to track UFO, UAP activity, this easy-to-carry, pocket-sized scientific data log is the perfect companion for any field researcher. You can find your copy of the Curious Research Field Observation and Encounter Log at Amazon.com. or visit the official Curious Realm store at curiousrealm.com/store to reserve your copy for yourself, your family, or a mind that you want to open. That website again is curiousrealm.com/store.